Yo, assalamu alaikum, everybody. I hope you are all doing good. And I can't really say the, dua I usually say because the room I'm in and forced to record here. But regardless, today's short video is just, of course, going to be responding towards Tron's VC analysis of the text debate and more so why I apparently quote unquote lost. And, um, the response is gonna be like short and simple because if I recall from the debate was on me asking him, "Oh yeah, well, do you believe religions are a patriarchal I can't pronounce it right, but patriarchal yeah anyways that in a religion according to society or according to that, like basically if it's like a man-powered specific system which oppresses women, which does not generate the most happiness within a utilitarianistic view, or some type of normative ethical system which says, oh yeah, well, it's right to do that, or if it's like oppress that, because oppression usually is viewed as wrong within normative, like basically just debating on if that's like society, good or not, obviously like some type of utilitarianistic fashion. Um, so to start off with one thing, his response to me sitting there saying he conceded via a modal fallacy. Modal fallacy is just sitting there saying, oh yeah, well, this also has to necessarily be the case in a possible world or some type of modal scope where it's like a contingent thing versus a necessary thing. Basically, like a contingent truth and necessary truth. It conflates those two things and assumes the same for both conceptions and ontology to be placed inside a possible world where, obviously, if you take it to be that way, it's just like a category error essentially. And he said that's a modal fallacy, but then later on, he said, "Oh yeah, well, if it's not condition, if it's can be conditioned on X, and could be that way." But obviously, he made like a definitionary approach to appeal to possibility within his meta dialogue of analyzing the VC, not the VC, sorry, the text confrontation between me and him. It's more so him saying, "Oh yeah, well, it's a type of modal fallacy," despite saying it's a modal fallacy. So let's get this out of the way real quick. Yes, both fallacies appeal to possibility, and a modal fallacy. Sorry, I stuttered. Deals with modality. Yes, it does deal with modality, but the problem here is that there are distinctions in what type of topics to handle within modality. Possibility doesn't necessarily have to apply to a specific possible world or possible worlds which involve all possible worlds in a contingent world, because the main point about modal fallacy is speaking about one contingent world being misplaced as having something necessary within it, right? Or obviously the operators being necessary or contingent. Therefore, it talks about like these several other entities in that case, because you would have to assume that there's a lot of words for something necessary to be the case or possibilities, and then there's just one contingent world. Obviously, it offers something more ontologically parsimonious being conflated with something that has to exist across all. So it's more ontologically complex than the other one. So it just conflates that. And mainly that's a confusion between, of course, possibility and like, the scope of modality. Not even the scope of modality, sorry. Um, how many possible worlds there are. It's just a conflation between like all possible worlds. Like it deals with like modal scopes. It just misplaces within it, like the operators and everything. So I mean, because modal scopes is the scopes of possibilities. Unless you're an anti-realist, you wouldn't believe in multiple scopes. You would have some type of nomological thing, which you would agree with being the case for our reality. In that case, that would be your nomological definition or some type of analytics. But of course, speaking wise, going into the appeal to possibility thing, appeal to possibility is just simply saying, oh yeah, something could be possible, but it doesn't guarantee it's actual. So it deals with actualization in the potentiality for being possible to be the case, because it doesn't affirm the actualization of it. So do you not see the distinction here, right? Basically, appeal to possibility doesn't have to specify some type of operator in like, of course, the possible worlds where it's being fitted into, or of course that, right? The distinction has to deal with possible appeal to possibility, of course, being the not even specified as with operators. It's more so saying, oh yeah, well, two different propositions are not the same, even though, yes, propositions can be like operators in the sense, because, data dicto versus de re, but mainly speaking wise, it deals with the propositions in which, the world talks about it, like contingent propositions, necessary propositions across all worlds. Like, yeah, it could be an operator, but at the same time, it deals with two distinct propositions, one being actualized, the other one being a possible potential, like can, is, like those two things create two different conjunctions for a proposition to be made, and how we would, of course, talk about these things within propositions to have a truth value, false value, and of course, being this specific proposition, otherwise to not create a category error between them, right? Because the fallacy is creating the category error between the two propositions. But of course, because it talks about propositions, whilst the other one talks about operators, he says, oh yeah, well, one, it's a modal fallacy, right? It's not a type of modal fallacy, because the modal fallacy is not a category. You'd say there are fallacies within modality, right? A modal fallacy is one thing. An entire category with a group would be more than one, okay? So your defense just falls flat on its face when you realize he said one fallacy and then confuses it for more fallacies, like an entire group trying to categorize that as. So even then, he's sitting there saying, oh yeah, well, respectively, I didn't concede because, of course, it's a total possibility. You got confused. You created a category error because you tried to conflate another one within the group of modality, right? And I even also made the distinction. They talk about different topics within modality. They're just categorized within, of course, talking about modality. But there's also different types of things within modality, like subsets. So obviously, the subset which they are affirmed to or categorized to do not hold the same in any retrospect, right? So claiming it's a modal fallacy is one type of thing. It's not the same as, of course, sitting there saying, oh yeah, well, you obviously made a category and I'm appealing to this specific type of fallacy, okay? So, and again, he also said for the willingness, if you can condition someone X doesn't guarantee that X is going to be there. To basically correct you on something like that, if I can condition something on X to be the case, and then it follows it's the case, that's just going to be a truth, or of course, like something like a true conditional would be the case. Not even a true conditional. Sorry, what am I saying? Like, if X, then Y follows. Obviously, it's going to be the case that the conditional itself just follows. If it's going to be the case, it's not a biconditional. Like if and only if. It's just in that case that, of course, like, it is going to follow from there, because the conditional is going to be exactly the case for the result to follow. Because obviously, if I were to give, like, say for example, if I was to, like, say, oh yeah, can you give an argument? I'm expecting an argument. Like, you're saying you can cash out the argument, right? If I'm saying you can cash out the argument, right? Clearly, in the debate format, right? If I say, oh yeah, well, you're saying you can cash out the argument in a dialectical format, it would be the burden of the person to give an argument because he's being asked that, right? Obviously, because he's on the positive or something, or a stance to be given for the reason, why, or, obviously for a proposition question, right? You're still assuming, right? Though you're still assuming, you're expecting something there to be there, because, of course, assuming that, of course, the person asserting the proposition is going to have a stance, or exactly, because I'm asking for the proposition inside the debate, right? I'm asking this guy for, if he, like, what's your stance, right? And it says you can cash out an argument. I'm asking the question. I'm not really asserting something, right? If I'm asserting something, obviously, it's just going to have to be an affirmative, because that's analytically what an assertion is. It's going to be having to, of course, have some type of sentimental thing, or not sentimental, more like some type of active thing in which it goes to grant something for a stance, right? But giving a proposition, right, and saying you can cash out an argument despite me asking for it, I'm not really taking a stance. I'm asking for what's your belief in it, because I'm proposing not really proposing, but going to discuss you on it, right? That's in the format of a discussion, because you told me to pick a proposition, right? If you're telling me to pick a proposition, and I say, do you believe this? And then you say, oh yeah, you can cash out the argument. You're expecting it to be the case, right? Simply because of the burden thing. The burden thing, of course, picking a proposition set a debate format, right? If you are taking it to be the case that there's going to be an argument by like saying, oh yeah, you can cash out the argument, you're saying I can, right? I can assumes the ability of being able to give an argument. It doesn't necessarily mean, of course, like assuming there's still content of an argument to be there to be given for the ability to give the argument. But if it's not, then I can't. It's not that I can. It's like can and can't negates can. Can says that there's ability for an argument. If there's no argumentational content or substance, I cannot give an argument because there's nothing valid for me to put forward as what would be considered an argument, right? Because it lacks that content. So that's still assuming under the can format. Like, say, for example, oh yeah, you can assert X, right? Assume the ability, because that's what can is, like can analytically. Of course, like sitting there saying, oh yeah, well, be able to analytically, that's like what the definition is, even inside textbooks or something like that. It's even within the dictionary, or I'm permitted to. And by the burden, you're expecting, yeah, but that's still just assuming like a stance to be given for an argument to be selected upon. Because when you are expected to give an argument, right, for a stance within a proposition, you have to choose, because from what a proposition has to be either true or false. If you choose a proposition that is either one, true, you are selecting that it's true to be the case, or false, you're selecting another proposition or, well, stance on the proposition in question, of course, to, of course, then have that stance for an argument, right? Again, I didn't select a stance, and you said, oh yeah, can you give an argument? If I'm not selecting any type of thing on the proposition in question, right, then there's no argument for me to give for the proposition when you're saying I can. No, I cannot, right? Anything which you say is just going to be like more so false because of this reason, which I even said you're assuming an argument, right? So what I'm saying is just more so valid under that structure, right, of what I'm arguing for. Even if this isn't in the dialogue, just keep in mind this is like a meta-analysis of what's being said, right? Because he said just because you can condition something on X, right? But what I'm explaining is that I'm conditioning this, right, on X, and he's expecting it from, of course, me being able to. I even stated this within the debate. Oh yeah, you said you can, right? And more so just some other useless points, but the main point is if he assumed that or not, right? The point is, can, yes. Yes, he did, right? And then I also covered the modal fallacy topic. He basically just conceded because he didn't have the right type of thing to even discuss about appeal to possibility. Appeal to possibility, terminology-wise, is distinct from a modal fallacy. It's referred to as this specific, fallacy, right? Or terminology within modality, right? And you try to assume a group for one type of thing. That's not the same thing, bro. Like, come on. And you try to put that in there and say, oh, yeah, well, it's still categorized as, so I can still refer to it as this. No, it's a terminology referred within, like, a group, but it still has its own subset. Therefore, it's not even a part of that. It's within the subset. And the group is just something that collectivize it, and it's like a quantifier which allows for, like, a predicate express thing or something to be, like, grow from it. Obviously, it just is kind of the thing which allows for it to go. It's a positive predicated thing which allows for you to do this. So not only did you fail to recognize that, of course, you misused the thing here, you literally created some type of category error between the group and a fallacy and the subsets. You've misplaced them and you don't recognize anything within here. So I think your main meta-analysis trying to debunk, oh yeah, it's a concession with, obviously me making a category on the fallacy is just wrong. You misused the terminology and didn't refer to the right fallacy within a subset, right? And obviously that just created a category between each subset of, modal, or, as you like to refer to it, modality fallacies, right? And obviously that's just going to misplace each one, and that's just going to be, of course, contradictory conceptually and virtually, because it just doesn't work out for you to follow, under truth functioning, like for the conjunction of it, everything just doesn't really uphold. if anything, Tron doesn't really know what he's talking about here, and I can safely say I think that the main points are there. Just doesn't really work out, and this is the reason why I believe I won, because obviously, like, he doesn't really respond to much of the points that are there. He just tries to fight it with irrelevant rhetoric and irrelevant things, which he doesn't acknowledge, and I can just say my substance is more coherent, and that's the reason why I believe I won, and everything, and, yeah. Hope you enjoyed the response video, so, yeah, bye.